to promote learning. I suppose these things are going to have to come from the top down, from a policy level. Andreas, I'm wondering if you could comment, do you see any policy barriers coming into play here to change education and change, for example, teacher preparation? Is there any mistakes that policymakers always make? Are there going to be some political reasons why policymakers won't put the necessary steps into place?
You know, education is an agenda where everybody has a view, everybody has a personal experience, and sometimes those views are actually counter to the very strong evidence that we have. For example, most people might think, you know, the most important thing is to have a small class. But in fact, what the evidence shows, and the report is a great example of that, you know, if you ever have to make a choice between a better teacher and a smaller class, go for a better teacher. But that's not the kind of message that policymakers will get, you know, from parents, from the teaching profession, and so on. So it is a very hard political agenda to deal with. It's a matter of prioritizing resources. It's a matter of developing long-term strategic foresight on that. You know, most policy reforms take a decade to implement. If you design a new curriculum, you know, if you want to actually implement that well with the kind of professional development, and if you want to actually, as Halsey just said, make teaching not just financially attractive, but intellectually attractive, you got to work very hard on this. And sometimes, you know, for policy, you have to sort of take courageous steps in this. And some countries are doing this. In fact, you know, you always have to put skills and education up front. The money will come later when the country gets wealthier. And politically, that's very, very difficult to justify. Now, sacrificing yourself today to have a better life tomorrow, explain that to your voters. But that is what the leading countries have actually done.
Is there a danger that, for example, it's a temptation to just throw money at the problem? Does that happen?
Well, you know, I think in the developing world, you can make a very strong argument for money. In fact, what we show is that up to a point of, you know, about $50,000 spending between the age of 6 and 15, money doesn't make a real difference. Once you get across that point, and that's actually true for most of the OECD countries, most of the kind of industrialized world are well beyond that point, actually money alone explains surprisingly little. It's not about investing more, it's about investing our money smarter. It's also about attracting the most talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms, matching resources with needs at the level of individuals, schools, and systems. Again, those things are hard to do. But that's what matters. It's not the volume of spending alone.
I'm being told we're having some questions from the Facebook audience. Thank you, Alison. Okay. We have one from Caitlin Clark. What role do you believe technology has in tackling the learning crisis? Dion, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. I mean, technology can play a huge part in addressing the learning crisis. But as we point out in the World Development Report, we don't want to be Pollyannish about technology solving all our problems. There are numerous cases around the world where, you know, just the simple deployment of technology has resulted in no changes in learning whatsoever. But some of the most impactful experiences in short-term improvements in learning come with some form of assistance of technology. I mean, the latest, most interesting adaptations are software that adapts teaching to the level of the student. A very interesting example recently in India, where this kind of software deployed well within classrooms, supported by, you know, facilitators, doubled the reading fluency of children with a very short period of time, 6 to 12 months. So technology can really help, but it has to be deployed well in a way that supports the teaching and learning relationship.
Got another question. Thank you, Dion. We have another question from Facebook from Mary Avetisian. Homework during school breaks, do they help or stress? I think, Halsey.
Andreas may have the answer to this one. I actually have not seen evidence on homework during school breaks. Andreas.
Well, Andreas is going to comment for us instead.
I'm probably not going to be liked for this comment, but actually we do have compelling evidence that homework in general is quite conducive to learning outcomes. It gives students, particularly when the learning in the classroom is very much front-loaded, where students are consumers, homework is an opportunity for students to develop ownership of the learning, to monitor their learning progress, and it's actually having a measurable impact on the results in the PISA study. Which is much less true for learning time in school. In fact, that comes back to Halsey's point about, you know, volume of learning. we can actually see only a very mild relationship between the number of hours students sit in the classroom and the learning achievement. You have some countries where students spend very little time but achieve a lot, whereas for homeworks, it's almost always having a positive impact, up to a point.
Sorry, can I say something on that? Sorry, I misinterpreted the question. This is also related to equity because we find that students from wealthier households tend to have the kind of cognitive stimulation during school breaks, whether it's through homework or out of school classes or something. And it's really the poorer children who fall further and further behind and lose a lot of any learning gains they've gotten over the course of, say, a summer break. And so we need to approach that through an equity lens about what will work to help those children who are at the poorest and least educated households.
Thank you. So students need to do their homework, basically. We do have a couple more questions. This one comes from Cassandra. My kid's school won't let me have much interaction with teachers, and I personally would like to be more involved in the process. I hope I'm not alone in thinking that. Should we be more looking at a more collaborative way of teaching our kids? Dion.
Sure. I mean, there's evidence from around the world that effective parental engagement in schools can make a big difference to school governance and then manifest itself through school management and ultimately result in better learning outcomes. The trouble with approaches that have tried to promote that, say, by school grants distributed to schools combined with a school committee, for example. This is a common practice in many developing countries. What we find is that tends to work better in communities where the parents are themselves better educated. So it can have a sort of a negative reinforcing effect on the equity front. So if we think about sort of involving parents in a generic sense across the developing world, then I think we have to be a little bit careful about how that's framed and how that's organized, what kind of support that parents have. But in general, I would agree with the comment that effective parental engagement in schools can make a huge difference to creating effective schools.
You know, it's not just effective engagement in schools, simply effective engagement of parents for education. This in PISA, the simple question, that parents ask their children every day, how was school, had a larger impact on learning outcomes than family income. It's very simple. It's not about an academic degree. It's not about the time you spent homework. It's about caring that what your children do in school actually matters to you.
Can I add one more point? Because parents are very important. In addition to what Andreas and Dion have said, parents getting engaged at the system level in these political debates is also quite important. We don't see that in many countries, but where we do, they can really be part of the solution, particularly if they help tell politicians that we care about learning, we care about learning for all the children. And so, as we emphasize in the World Development Report, that is part of getting that political alignment toward learning for all.
Are there any countries that involve parents better than other countries? Are there countries out there that shut parents out completely? Who's kind of doing the best at the moment with this?
I have not seen any league tables on this. I'd be very interested in what Andreas has to say about this. One country in which I've engaged with the World Bank where I was impressed was in Cyprus, actually, when we were engaged in some discussions in Cyprus around reforming the education system a couple of years ago. There was a parents' council that was actually active in these national debates, perhaps because it's a smaller country, but it seemed to us at the time that it really was helpful for making sure everybody who had a stake in learning was at the table. I'd be very interested in hearing of other examples that Andreas knows.
Yeah, no, I think this is a perfect example. I do think also we can learn a lot from the East Asian countries. If you go to Japan, for example, the strongest organization in the education system is not the ministry, not the union, it's the Parent-Teacher Association. They have an office in every school, and parents engage through them with the school. You don't have to talk to your principal, you talk to that association. They take care, parents involved in the substance of development. I think that's a very strong example. In China, every teacher is going to be on a WeChat group, which is like Facebook, with every parent. They have their communities. There's a strong culture of not only, we talk to the parents, we explain to the parents, but teachers would see naturally that they need the support of every parent to do their job.
So I think we have time for just one more Facebook question, actually, and I think this one, very, very good question from Raven Gaddy. We've been talking a lot about what children learn in school and what they need to learn to succeed in later life. And Raven asks, how do you decide what skills should be taught and what skills are needed for life? I think if we start maybe with Dion.
Sure, I know this is something that Andreas has spent a lot of time on, but let me just tell you how we frame this in the report, because I think it's actually quite complementary to a lot of the good things I've read from the OECD, which is that while what employers need from students may change over time and may change with economic growth and economic diversification in countries, for example, skills beget skills. And every child needs a strong foundation of skills on which to build. And in the World Development Report, we really focus a lot on those foundational skills and how can we ensure that all the children have the basis for learning further skills. And as we mentioned earlier, this starts in the earliest of childhood, goes through the primary, the lower secondary schools, and then to be sure the sort of the skills that are required for jobs tend to be developed more narrowly in the upper secondary level and post-secondary. But as we emphasize in the report, getting those foundational skills right is central to so that kids and young adults can learn to learn and acquire the further skills that they'll need.
Andreas, I'm wondering if you could comment.
Yeah, no, who should decide? I mean, governments obviously have an important role to frame curricula and instructional systems, but in fact it's also about, creating more openness, creating more better eyes and ears of education actually to see the world as it is changing. The kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test have also become easy to digitize, automate, outsource. The reproduction of subject matter content remains important, but what matters for you is to extrapolate from what you know, to apply your knowledge in novel situations, to think like a scientist, not just know something in biology, chemistry, physics, to think like a mathematician, to think like an historian. And I think those things are not necessarily what employers will tell you. Employers are very good in telling you what they need today. They're often not that good in telling you what they need tomorrow. I give you a very prominent example. Today everybody talks about, let's teach 3-year-olds coding. They need to have something to do with programming. By the time those children will graduate, they will ask themselves, what was coding? Remind me. In a way, it's about teaching students fewer things at greater depths to help them develop the thinking skills so that they can manage their own future.
Well, I think we could talk about this all afternoon, really, but I think we've just about run out of time. Thank you, Dion, Halsey, and Andreas for joining me, and thank you to everyone watching at home. If you would like to know more about the World Bank's World Development Report 2018, you can find it on their website. We'll be putting the links on our Facebook and our Twitter. And don't forget to follow the World Bank's Twitter pages. They have two. There's the research Twitter page, which is @WB_research, and the education Twitter page, which is @WB_education. And finally, don't forget to follow the OECD's education Twitter account, which is @OECD EduSkills. Thank you everyone for watching, and until next time.